This podcast is a member of the New York City Podcast Network at nycpodcastnetwork.com. Visit us to listen to over 250 amazing podcasts just like this one.
Japanese street style is some of the cutest and trendiest clothing in the world. Introducing Cherry Goddess Women's Clothing and Accessories, the hottest original and cute clothing company. We offer tops, clothes, accessories, shoes, dresses and skirts, and comfortable homeware that we guarantee you will love. Cherry Goddess Women's Clothing, super cute Japanese style clothing.
This is Black Wall Street Chronicles, and we're back at it again. Today we're going to get right to it. If you guys want to find out any more information or where you can follow me, you can go to my Instagram, which is BlackKage840. My Instagram is BlackKage840, and on my Instagram you'll have my bios. So today is going to be an important episode where I talk about the fact that President Trump has acquired Covid-19 and how I find it very inoffensive that he's very cavalier about it. I mean, he's been putting out information about COVID-19 being a fraud and COVID-19 is not real, it's not serious as they think it is, and then he's actually caught it. Even if you are, I'm not a Trump supporter, but even if you are a Trump supporter, you have to be afraid that this man is going to die. And the reason why he's going to die is because he's being too cavalier. And he's not being serious. Right? So, and the episode I did is season 1, episode 29. I talked about quarantine. And what I did is I went on wikipedia.com and I did a crash course on not only if it told me what the quarantine policy is, where the quarantine policy comes from. The quarantine policy has been inspired by the Torah, the Quran, and the Bible. According to the Torah, Moses taught his people to stay inside during the last plague of Egypt. Now that right there sounds like a quarantine. According to Mosaic law, the Prophet Muhammad said to separate the sick from the healthy. That right there is a form of quarantine. And then finally, in Italy, what they did to save Italians from the Black Plague is they had people who was infected with the symptoms of the Black Plague separate themselves for 40 days. And the reason why this was effective, because in 40 days, all the people who got COVID-19, not COVID-19, that was a Freudian slip. Anybody who had the Black Plague, the incubation process of the Black Plague is like 6 days. So anybody who had the Black Plague died off, and whoever survived the Black Plague actually created antibodies and they wasn't sick anymore. And that was where the quarantine process comes from. Now, the Italians was inspired by the Bible. The 40 days policy actually comes from the story in the Bible where Jesus Christ separated himself from 40 days and hid in the mountains. So, being that the quarantine policy has been inspired by the Bible, the Torah, and the Quran, why is it that the Hasidic Jews, the Nation of Islam, and the Christian churches cannot get their flock to follow quarantine policy? Like, I live in New York City, and you have the Hasidic community who is very adamant on breaking quarantine laws implemented by Governor Cuomo Mayor Bill de Blasio. And they're putting everybody in risk. And there was an article in the New York Post where there was a Hasidic Jewish man that was trying to put the information on the internet about how they was breaking quarantine laws, trying to tell the world what the Hasidic Jewish community was doing wrong. And the Hasidic Jewish community called him a snitch and actually beat the heck out of this guy. And if you don't believe me, there's an article in the New York Post talking about this. Minister Farrakhan has Reza Islam putting out, these information about vaccines and how vaccines don't work. But listen, if we don't get a vaccine, Americans is not going to be able to go outside. I'm stuck in the house in quarantine policy. I'm an essential worker, and the situation's really weighing on me, and it's weighing on my family members who work and who are frontline workers, and this is getting really bad out here. And the businesses, in New York City, if they do one more shutdown, all of the businesses, all of the small businesses in New York City is going to be done for. So it's really chaos out here. You have the poor governor of Michigan. She was almost kidnapped. Being that the law enforcement is put on pressure, we have a whole bunch of agents of chaos out here causing trouble, causing mayhem, and causing destruction. Something has to be done. Again, I really don't think that President Trump is a competent president. If you are a Trump supporter and you disagree, that's fine. I really think he's not competent. And the reason why I think that he's not competent, because you have to understand that the United States of America already had a pandemic team in place that was established by George W. Bush, a Republican. George W. Bush established a pandemic team. And the reason why he established it, because he figured out that every 100 years there's some sort of pandemic that comes along and kills a whole bunch of human beings. In my opinion, the reason why this happens is that, Mother Nature gets tired of humanity messing with the environment, so she comes up with a virus that just kills a whole bunch of humans off. No one knows for sure. Now, after George W. Bush created the pandemic policy, President Barack Obama came along and thought that it was a good idea. And President Barack Obama, with his pandemic team, he was able to stop the Ebola virus for killing a whole bunch of Americans. Now, President Trump fires the pandemic team. He pretends the virus is not real, and he's basically responsible for the killing of 200,000 Americans. I am very frustrated of this. I'm very aggravated, and I'm kind of scared, like a lot of Americans are. And if you are listening to this and you are a frontline worker, and I salute you, and we'll all get through this. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read some articles about President Trump and how he's handling COVID-19. Hold on, please. Okay, this article's from CNN Politics. This article was written by Maeve Reston of CNN. It was updated 10:30 p.m. Saturday, October 10th, 2020, which is like last night. So here it is. 7 hours after defying President Trump resumed event Saturday with a decisive speech from the White House balcony. In front of hundreds of guests, his doctor released a memo clearing him to return to an active schedule. Trump's Saturday event, which featured little social distancing, came just 2 weeks after a large White House gathering that has since been called a super predator event and potentially put lives at risk once again. Super predator event? Let me read that again. White House gathering that has been called a super predator event and potentially put lives at risk once again, just 9 days after the president revealed his own COVID-19 diagnostics. The latest memo for Trump's physician, Navy Commander Dr. Sheen Conley, said that the president has met U.S. Centers for Disease Control preventive criteria for the safe discontinuation of isolation, but it does not say Trump has received a negative coronavirus test since the first testing positive for the virus, although this is not a criteria for clearing isolation according to the CDC. This evening, I am happy to report that in addition to the president meeting CDC criteria for the safe discontinuation of isolation, this morning's COVID PCR sample demonstrates by currently recognized standards he is no longer considered a transmission risk to others. The memo from Conley reads in part. That's welcome news for Trump, who's been itching to return to the campaign trail and has already planned 3 rallies for next week. But the memo's opacity and the inability for reporters to question the doctors and the fact that the White House still will not say when Trump last tested negative before his positive diagnosis only adds to the confusion over his case, which Trump has been eager to distract from. After being signed out for the campaign trail for more than a week, Trump leaned into this law and order message in a speech threaded with falsehoods on Saturday that was clearly a campaign rally disguised as a White House event. Trump claimed that if the left gains power, they'll launch a crusade against law enforcement, echoing his highly inaccurate campaign ads that suggested Democratic nominee Joe Biden would defund 911 operations and have a therapist answer calls about crime. Charles falsely claimed that the left is focused on taking away firearms, funds, and authority from police. With just 3 weeks to go until an election which he is trailing badly in the polls, millions of voters already voting. Trump is deploying familiar scare tactics. Biden has not made any proposals that will affect the ability to answer 911 calls. As CNN Facts First has noted many times, Biden has repeatedly opposed the idea of defunding the police. And he has proposed a $300 million increase in federal funding for community policing. As at all of his campaign events, Trump law and order rhetoric applied only to his antipathy towards Democrats and the left. He made no mention of the growing power of the right-wing hate anti-government extremist groups, including those who were charged last week in an alleged plot to kidnap Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer and instigate a civil war. Attorney General William Barr, for all his focus on left-wing violence, hasn't commented publicly on the arrests. Whitmer had argued in his speech that Trump's refusal to condemn white supremacists and hate groups during a recent presidential debate had only emboldened these groups. After the plot was made public, Trump exonerated Whitmer in a tweet for locking down the state as part of precautionary measures to protect Michiganders from the pandemic. Saturday's event was proportionally aimed at Black and Latino Americans who Trump agreed are benefiting from his agenda. Who Trump argued are benefiting from his agenda. Attendees included members of the own group known as Blexit that was founded by conservative firebrand Candace Owens to encourage African Americans to leave the Democratic Party, and his speech, however, seemed aimed at the white subordinates who are not sympathetic to the Black Lives Matter movement. I understand why the president would have an event focusing on minority communities, Black and brown, and not mention what it's all about. House Majority Whip James Clyburn said on CNN's newsroom, noting how coronavirus has exacerbated health inequities. It would seem to me that the president will be saying to them, "This is what my election will mean to the elimination of these disparities." He did not do that simply because he does not have the capacity to empathize with that these communities are experiencing in this particular pandemic. The South Carolina Democrat added, "The ignorance of Trump inviting a group of Black and Latino Americans who have been disproportionately affected by the coronavirus to an event at the White House at a time where he might still be contagious was appalling to Dr. Jeremy Foss, an emergency physician at Brigham and Williams Hospital. The image we are seeing are absolutely extraordinary," Foss said in CNN's newsroom, as the attendees of the South Lawn were closely packed together to literally draw Black and Latino activists into the White House, to the hot zone. It's extraordinary in depth in terms of public policy and public health. If you believe nuclear power is safe, you don't go and have a picnic at the Chernobyl the next day to prove the point. Still downplaying the virus while avoiding his own possible contagion. Conley Walton Saturday remembered that Trump is 10 days from the onset of symptoms that has been fever-free for well than 24 hours after diagnosed the test. There's no longer evidence of actively replicating virus. But Conley did not fully explain what advanced diagnostic test the president received. For example, he did not disclose whether so-called viral culture was performed. This is the process which, by scientists, try to infect living cells to see whether active virus is present. Trump skimmed over the details of his coronavirus diagnosis during the Saturday remarks, saying that he felt great and showing no signs that he has been chastened by his illness or the danger he potentially poses to others. He thanked attendees for their prayers and noted that early in his speech that he had been criticized for leasing the hospital and the SVU with Secret Service agents last night, Sunday, to thank supporters standing on the street. "I took a little heat for it, but I'll do it again. Let me tell you, I do it again," he said. "We have started very, very big with our rallies and our everything," Trump said, alluding to his return to the campaign trail. He has 3 rallies planned for next week in Florida, Pennsylvania, and Iowa. The president continued downplaying the virus, saying that U.S. will defeat it and that scientists and pharmaceutical companies are producing powerful therapeutics. "The vaccine is coming out very soon," he said, even though the director of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has said most of Americans are likely to get a vaccine until at least the middle of next year. And Trump continued to use this racist language as the China virus, noting flare-ups in Europe and Canada, but without mentioning the upward trend in new cases in the United States. "A lot of the flare-ups, but it's going to disappear. It is disappearing. The vaccines are going to help," he said. Saturday's large gathering followed Trump's acknowledgement during a televised interview with Fox News Sunday that he had contracted the virus at one of the recent events in the White House. Trump gave an incomprehensible answer about his latest coronavirus test results Friday. "I haven't even found out numbers or anything yet, but I've been rested and I know I'm either at the bottom of the scale of a tree," Trump told Fox News medical analyst Dr. Mark Siegel on Tucker Carlson last night. "They test every couple of days, I guess, but it's really at a level now that has been great to see it disappear." CNN chief medical correspondent Dr. Sanjay Gupta noticed that the Fox interview offered very little clarity about Trump's level of contagion and said that if the president has simple answers about testing negative, he would have given it. "They're being purposely vague on this, but I think they are trying to track his viral load," Gupta said on Chromo Primetime. As Trump taped the Fox interview, he said he had stopped taking medicine 8 hours earlier, but he also underscored the seriousness of the illness, where he acknowledged that the scans of the lungs in the hospital has been shown congestion and that he took steroid dexamethasone because the swelling down of the lungs. White House doctors have not spoken directly to the press since Trump left Walter Reed National Military Medical Center on Monday. Conley said in his Thursday statement that Saturday will be day 10 since Trump's diagnosis and based on the specific tests that the team was conducting. I fully anticipate the president's safe return to public engagements at the time. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that its website that patients with mild or moderate illness are infectious for up to 10 days, while those with severe to critical illness could remain infectious up until 20 days after the onset of symptoms. The medications that Trump received has suggested serious illness to many of the doctors interviewed by CNN. No evidence of change to White House protocols. Still, the president's illness does not appear to have changed the safety protocols adopted by the White House or Trump's campaign, even though Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease specialist, said on Friday that it's now clear that Trump's Rose Garden ceremony for his Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, 2 weeks ago was a super spreader event. We had a super spreader event in the White House, Fauci told CBS News Radio on Friday. It was in a situation where people were crowded together, were not wearing masks, so the data speaks for themselves. Attendees at Saturday's White House were also asked to bring masks and were supposed to be screened with temperature checks. A source of knowledge of the planning told CNN ahead of the event, but while Trump said he may not have contracted the virus at the White House, he made no mention to masks when Siegel asked him for the lessons he had learned contracting the coronavirus. The cases are now rising in 28 states, and Friday marked the second number of new coronavirus cases worldwide, more than 350,000 in a single day, according to World Health Organization. They have some big events at the White House and perhaps there. He said that when Siegel asked where he thought he contracted the virus, I don't really know. Nobody really knows for sure. Numerous people are contracted, but people have contracted all over the world. It is highly contagious. Trump said his main takeaway from his illness was that COVID patients should seek medical treatment as soon as they directly possible symptoms. It is the secret for me when I got there very early. Trump said during the Siegel interview, acknowledging that many Americans do not have the same level of medical care or access to doctors that he does. I think it's going as early is a big factor in my case. But when it comes to preventing the spread of disease, the White House still seems to be faulting basic health precautions, with the Saturday protocol not looking much different from the September 26 Rose Garden event, where at least 12 people who attended, including former New Jersey Governor Christie, who was released from the hospital Saturday after a week-long stay, has contracted the virus, forcing the White House to empty out after aides went into quarantine. The Commission on Presidential Debates on Friday canceled the second debate, which is scheduled for next Thursday, after the president declined to do a virtual debate despite concerns over his COVID-19 diagnosis, organizers said. Trump has quickly announced more rallies, even though at least 9 people who attended Trump's September 18 rally in Beach, Minnesota, has tested positive, according to Chris Elserman, the state infectious disease director. 9 cases reported attending the rally. 1 case was known to be infectious. Elserman said there were 2 hospitalizations that were associated with that, one who was in intensive care and no deaths to his point. That would normally be chilling news for any campaign to hear, but it has not affected Trump's desire to get back on the trail to the receive adulation from his fans at a time where he is trailing Democratic nominee Joe Biden by 11 points in CNN's polls of polls. He hasn't hesitated in the past to put his supporters or those who protect him at risk. The president endangered Secret Service agents at the height of his own illness, traveling with them in an SUV to thank supporters who would cheer for him outside Walter Reed. The agents wore medical gowns, masks, and eye protection as they escorted him on the necessary trip out of the hospital. But Trump still defended that much criticized photo op during his Fox appearance with Siegel. After 2 days, I said, I wanted to go out and say hello to the people. And I went to the Secret Service, and these are the people that are with me all the time. We have no problem, sir, Trump claimed in Friday's interview on Fox. CNN's Kevin Liptak, however, has reported that members of the Secret Service have expressed escalating concern about the disregard of their well-being in the midst of the deadly pandemic. Our current Secret Service agent who works on the presidential and first family detail said that never should have happened. We're not disposable, the agent told CNN. Trump offers wildly varied descriptions of his illness. As medical experts try to assess the risk to Trump's supporters at the weekend's White House event and next week's rallies, the president's own descriptions of how serious of the case coronavirus became have varied wildly this week. As medical experts try to assess the risk to Trump's supporters at the weekend's White House event and next week's rallies, the president's own descriptions of how serious this case's coronavirus became had varied wildly this week. On Monday, as he returned from the Walter Reed Medical Center, Trump implored Americans not to be afraid of the coronavirus or let it dominate you, and said, "You're gonna beat it." I commend him for for being positive. He's still making some mistakes. On Friday, in the midst of the Bliss interviews with friendly news outlets, he said on the Rush Limbaugh radio show that he might have not been recovered if he had not received the monoclonal antibody treatment for the Regeneron. "I was not in great shape, and we have a medicine that healed me, that fixed me," Trump said on the show. "It is a great medicine. I feel better now than I did 2 weeks ago. It's crazy, and I recovered immediately, almost immediately. I have not recovered at all from COVID." On Friday in Fox interview, Trump also acknowledged that many people have died from COVID and the pandemic has been very painful for many American families. But in a moment of cognitive dissonance, he seemed not to realize that the lives he cannot be jeopardized with his return to the campaign trail. Biden clearly plans to make it a campaign issue in the coming days. During an event in Las Vegas Friday, he criticized the president's reckless personal conduct, and he said it was having a destabilizing effect on their government. He didn't take the necessary precautions to protect themselves from others, Biden said. "The longer Donald Trump is president, the more reckless he gets. How can we trust him to protect this country?" Yeah, and that's the article from CNN. Again, the person who wrote this article is the name by Maeve Reston. She did an analysis on President Trump's reaction, decisive White House speech, and how he's not handling his own sickness with COVID-19 the correct way. This is her opinion. I happen to agree with her. I don't like the fact that, President Trump is able to get the best care, in the United States of America because he's the commander-in-chief, but 200,000 other Americans die because they don't have the access to proper health care. Anyway, this personally gets me mad, but I'm gonna push through it. Scientific American article. Okay, this article is 2 days ago. Even though he says he's fine and he's out. He says he's fine and he's out the hospital, but I'm going to read this article from Scientific American, Public Health. Trump's COVID case could be entering a crucial stage. Doctors say the president could be heading for a bad stretch of prolonged illness or an upward path to recovery. Early in the morning on October 2nd, President Donald Trump tweeted that he had tested positive for COVID-19. Only 33 days away from a highly contentious election, The diagnosis plunged the nation into uncertainty. Doctors, scientists, and pundits quickly began speculating on what would happen to the president, and the White House has been both tight-lipped and prone to giving conflicting information about the VIP patient. But in general, the course of this disease is no longer a complete black box to medicine. Trump will be at a fork of the world during the later half of this week, saying infectious disease and critical care physicians who spoke with Scientific American. He could be heading for a bad stretch and prolonged illness, or he could be in an upward swing to recovery. Doctors sadly have experienced the treating of more than 36 million COVID-19 patients worldwide and more than 7.5 million in the U.S. Using this clinical history, many now divide the disease into several stages, each with distinct symptoms and treatments. Based on what he first reported symptoms, Trump appears to be at the end of one phase and at the verge of the next. Here's the sequence that physicians usually see and how it applies to the president. Exposure and incubation. A COVID-19 infection begins when the SARS-CoV-2 virus enters cells in the body and begins to replicate. This period of time after infection but before symptoms start is called the incubation period, and it occurs between 2 or 14 days contracting the virus. While people may not know that they are sick, they are often become contagious 2 or 3 days before the symptoms begin. Viral replication. Symptoms start by the 5th day after infection for most people, and they include fever, cough, sore throat, fatigue, aches, pains, gastrointestinal issues, and loss of smell and taste. Tazen Bell, a pulmonary and critical care physician at the University of Virginia, says that when symptoms rise, this change signals that a person is at peak infectivity, which means that they are shedding lots of virus particles in the air, putting nearby people at risk. This timing has big implications for the president and those around him. Bell says the most famous person in the world right now has COVID-19, and one could assume, based on the timeline, that he could have been infectious during the presidential debate. The televised argument with challenger Joe Biden took place last Saturday, and Trump began showing symptoms on the following Thursday. He is still infectious now, and when he took his joyride, says Bell, referring to a short trip Trump in a car with Secret Service on Sunday. The vehicle traveled in just around the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, where he was being treated. At this early stage of the disease, most of the people do not receive aggressive treatment. But Trump was given 2 experimental drugs, the antiviral medication remdesivir and an infusion of monoclonal antibodies. He also received an established medication, the steroid dexamethasone. Bell says that remdesivir and the antibody therapy made sense at the point in the progression of COVID-19 because they aim to slow or stop the viral replication. But dexamethasone is used at a later stage to tap down the immune system overreactions. Tom Frieden, former head of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention of Infectious Disease physician, calls the early use of an immune symptom inhibitor puzzling because at the beginning of COVID-19 bout, the body needs its natural defenses to work to fight against the virus. I don't know what to make of it, he says. Frieden also notes that most people do not have access to the experimental drugs, partially because of the shortage and the lack of FDA approval. A typical patient probably will not get all 3. But it's not unusual for presidents to get special treatment because of their leadership role. Immune overdrive, the next phase of the illness, usually occurring between 6 and 10 days after the infection, is when the immune system goes into overdrive. It's kind of like the gas pedal gets pushed too hard and gets sucked, Bell says. Not all patients go down this path, but the bodies of those who did get amped up when the clinical signals called cytokines become alarmingly hypoactive. The cytokines trigger a strong inflammatory response that leads to high fevers, immune cells that attack healthy tissues, and lungs that fill with fluid. If this immune system is not controlled, patients can suffer organ failure and require medical ventilation. This could be the period Trump is entering, given the timing and offset of his symptom. According to Abir Karan, a physician at Belgium Memorial Hospital in Boston, who specializes in emerging infectious diseases, it would be a critical moment in his practice. He has seen people recovering from the early viral infection and even go home to the hospital, but then to decline suddenly and come back feeling much sicker. Whose even worse oxygen levels and possibly other harm to the body's organs, he said. Inflammatory damage to the heart can cause myocarditis, for instance, and when it hits the pancreas, it may lead to type 2 diabetes. Inflammatory complications. Edie Kim, a critical care physician at Barrington and Women's, explained that a striking figure of the COVID-19 pandemic is how many patients suffer complications for the cytokine storm. In his practice, he sees a lot of people who are hospitalized with blood clots and secondary bacterial infections, such as methicillin resistant. I can't pronounce this. Methicillin resistant staphylococcus. Oh, this is MRSA, and this is MRSI. It's methicillin resistant staphylococcus aureus, whatever. In his practice, he sees a lot of people with hospital with blood clots and secondary bacterial infections. Some doctors prescribe preventative anticoagulants to manage clotting or preventive antibiotics to halt infection in the intensive care unit. Clotting complications which can affect as many as 31% of COVID-19 patients in the ICU can even occur in even mild cases. Kim said all patients with the disease admitted to this hospital are given a very low dose of anticoagulant. He notes that this kind of medication was absent from the list of Trump's treatments that was provided by his doctors. It is possible that he was not given to Trump because he was feeling well enough to be walking around, and activity reduces the chance of clotting, Kim says. The long haul. Those patients who eventually fight off the virus survive the inflammatory assault, and estimated 10% are left with months of debilitating symptoms. Some doctors are beginning to think that this tail end of COVID as another stage. Patients suffer debilitating headaches, mental fog, deep exhaustion, and an assortment of other problems. G. Marshall Lyon, an infectious disease physician at Emory University, says many of these difficulties look similar to myalgic methicillin, also called chronic fatigue syndrome, which is a long-term illness that affects a wide variety of body parts and system. He said he has seen some success with antidepressants, but doctors still are in learning phase and research on effective intervention continues. Lyon, who's treated patients during the 2014 Ebola pandemic, said COVID-19 is notoriously unpredictable when the illness begins. It is nearly impossible to tell, in the first few days of infection, who is going to get super sick and who is not. But after a week or so of illness, the prognosis becomes clearer. For Trump, Kim believes that what happens during the latter half of this week will be key. Bell agrees and says Trump could be on the cusp of heading into the immune overdrive phase. If he enters it at all, Kim admits he cannot predict the future, but that's generally what I accept. This sentence was adding after his posting to state specific diseases caused by inflammatory damage to the heart and pancreas. Read more about the coronavirus outbreak from Scientific American here, and read coverage from our internal network of magazines. Alright, so this article is from Scientific American. It was written by Monique Boulalac on October 9th, 2020. Yeah, Monique, if I pronounced your name wrong, I am very sorry. Alrighty. Read. There's an article on Scientific American that says Neanderthal DNA may be a COVID risk. Okay, this is interesting. This article is from Scientific American. It was written by 9 hours ago by Christopher Intiglia on October 10, 2020. Neanderthal DNA may be a COVID risk. A stretch of Neanderthal DNA has been associated with some cases of severe COVID-19, but is it clear how much of risk it poses? Christopher Intiglia reports. Let's give the full transcript. The risk factors of COVID-19 are many: old age, obesity, heart conditions, but early genetic studies have been identified another trait that some people who develop severe COVID-19 see to share: a cluster of genetic variations on the third chromosome. And their DNA sequence likely derives from Neanderthals, said Hugo Zerberg of the Max Planck Institute. It's quite striking that this variant has lingered on for 50,000 years. 50,000 years ago is the approximate time humans and Neanderthals interbred, and over the millennia, these Neanderthal variants have become more common in some Homo sapien populations than others. For example, 16% of European descent carry at least one copy of Neanderthal stretch, half of the South Asians do, and nearly 2/3 of the Bangladeshis. It is fascinating that it's so high. It points to the fact that it must have been beneficial in the past. It is much higher than we expected, and it is totally in spawns in East Asia and China, so something has happened. Doing the frequency up in certain places and removing it totally in other places. The details in journal Nature. The major genetic factor risk for severe COVID-19 is inherited from the Neanderthals. I need to do a whole episode on this, because there's a whole lot of information. Let me finish this article, and then I'm gonna end the podcast, and I'm gonna go into this article and this Neanderthal DNA construct theory that they have, and we're gonna talk more about that. Selberg and his colleagues, while that percepts the Neanderthal DNA happens to boost the risk of developing severe COVID-19, and they point to the fact that UK people of Bangladesh descent has twice the risk of dying of COVID-19 than the general population. That is epidemiologist Keith Neal of University of Nottingham pointing out via mail, people of African descent in the UK are also being hurt more by the virus, despite having hardly any Neanderthal genes. Instead, it's social factors like crowded, multi-generational households or working frontline jobs that are more likely to be driving trends, such in the UK. That's according to Andrew Hayward, Director of Institute Epidemiology and Healthcare at University College London. As both epidemiologists pointed out, it's worth remembering that you can only develop severe COVID-19 if you're exposed to the virus in the first place. Alright, let's see. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. Now, what I want you guys to do, who's listening to the episode, I want you to follow me on Instagram, BlackHockey840. I want you to follow me. It will have my bio, so it will basically have a list of all the places where you can follow me at. On my Black Hog 840 on my bios, they'll also have my IMDb page. IMDb page. It will basically show a listing my podcast and my listing on the IMDb rating system. Oh, and I would like to all of the new listeners who are listening to my podcast. I noticed on my analytics, there's a lot of people who are showing interest. Thank you very much. And I'm on anchor.com, so if you like my podcast, you can go to my link on anchor.com and you can leave a $10 monthly donation for me if you're interested. Thank you very much. And next week we will talk about the theory of Neanderthal DNA, and we'll basically do more articles talking about the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you very much, and you enjoy your week.